بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Okay, the guidance residential program, first of all, guidance has taken great pains to publicize their program and to educate the Muslim public about it. So by means of their website, by means of webinars, by means of seminars, nadawat, conferences, they have reached out to the Muslim public here in the United States and also to the community of Imam, directors of Islamic centers and specialists across the country. Moreover, in the last year and a half now, they've had another, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, in Washington, D.C., we had a program which was attended by every single member of our Sharia board at that time. I don't know if maybe some of you attended that or not, but the idea at that time was to introduce the program, but more importantly to talk about, you know, the coming wave of Islamic finance at the retail level in the United States. And we thought that we would begin with the directors of Islamic centers and with imams around the country. It was a very successful program. This was repeated in a briefer way, on a smaller scale, in California 3 years ago, I believe, and perhaps some of you had the opportunity to attend. But to begin with, what I want to say is that consumer education is extremely important in finance, period, and especially in home finance. First of all, people generally know very little about finance. In fact, most people don't even know about their own finances. It's hard, you know, they have trouble balancing their checkbooks. So it's important to reach out to the community and promote financial literacy. And that doesn't mean that, you know, you're going to turn everybody into a stockbroker and get them past their examinations. But what it does mean is that people need to start thinking about planning for their financial future and present, short-term, long-term, so on and so forth. And more importantly, they need to know what is available to them on the market. The guidance residential program is based on a series of contracts, not just one, several. And the nature of the relationship between the customer and the financier, guidance residential, changes throughout the process. So at the very outset, you have a situation where a customer is interested in buying a home. That customer is free to go into the market, look around at the neighborhoods, look at the houses, inspect the houses, make sure that the house that they're interested in is in the right place, make sure it's in good condition, and then they'll go and get it appraised. If the numbers turn out right, the house is actually worth what the owners, the sellers, are asking, then they can come to guidance. This is the acquisition stage. And at this stage, what happens is that the owner, the customer, will enter into a partnership with Guidance Residential. And the important thing is the nature of this partnership. Okay, so we describe it as Musharaka mutanaqisa. But that's only part of the story. Let's talk about the Musharaka Mutanaqisa side of the story. Basically what this means is that there is a diminishing partnership to be established, and in which the homeowner, by degrees, eventually will buy out the shares of Guidance Residential. So let's say that there's 100 shares in the house. Guidance puts down, Guidance purchases 80 of those shares, whatever they're worth, and the customer puts down, agrees to buy 20% of those shares, or 20 of those shares. Over time, or at the initiation of that contract, the homeowner, the consumer, the customer, will agree to buy out the shares owned by Guidance. So in this manner, so in other words, they're an equity partner. In conventional terms, that's basically it's an equity partner. But the agreement between them is that the customer will buy out the share of the majority equity holder, which is Guidance. Although it doesn't need to be the majority. It could be, they could finance only part of it. It could be that the homeowner comes with, or the consumer comes to Guidance with 50% down payment, or 60 or 70 or 80, whatever the case. But the remaining share will belong to Guidance, and the customer will, over a period of time, make monthly payments agreed upon in advance, in accordance with a specific schedule. Okay, and the idea was to be was to make the product look and act just like, or rather, to make the product fit within the existing system, so that when regulators looked at it, when local authorities looked at it, when the recorder of the deed looked at it, it would be something familiar and they could deal with it easily. Okay, so that's the diminishing partnership side of the equation. The other part of the initial acquisition contract has to do with the actual type of partnership. Aside from being a diminishing partnership, there's another aspect, and that is that the partnership will be based on what the classical fuqaha have referred to or classified as shirkat amlak, shirkat milk, where basically you have a situation that is quite different from a partnership as we normally understand it. When you say partnership, immediately people think of a business arrangement. Okay? This was not the intention. The intention here, it's called Guidance Residential. The intention was to get people into homes. The intention was not to enable people to buy property for the purpose of speculation, but as a part of a community building exercise. The idea was to get people into homes, facilitate their home ownership. So rather than call it or classify that agreement as a shirkat aqd bi'anwa'ihi, because there are several different kinds. Shirkat uqud, there are several different kinds, as you've seen in the buhuth here, in the booklet. Now, this is kind of an arbitrary call, and not an arbitrary call, rather, when our Sharia board considered the different kinds of partnerships for this program, there was a great deal of discussion. I don't remember exactly how it went and why it went the way that it did, but I do know that that at bottom line, we did decide to go with the Shirkat milk. And we thought the reason for doing that, or one of the reasons for doing that, is that there's a little bit more flexibility with that particular arrangement. Because had we gone for one of the other sorts of commercial partnerships, Shirkat Aynan, or Mudaraba, or Mufawada, or Wujuh, or whatever the different kinds may be, there are specific ahkam, rules and regulations attached to those different kinds of partnerships. We wanted to have a little bit more wiggle space, let's say. Because as I mentioned to you this morning in my talk, we're constantly faced with difficulties which are not of a Sharia nature, but which are forced upon us from outside, either for reasons having to do with taxation, or with regulation, or even with business. So that's the road we took. The result of that is that the diminishing partnership is not subject to all of the rules that some of the other kinds of partnerships are subject to. And that has led to some misunderstandings and some difficulties. But ultimately, this is what allowed the project to get off the ground. So that's stage one at the acquisition stage. Then stage two takes place. Once the home has been acquired on the terms explained, that the homeowner will, over time and according to a specific schedule, make payments for a number of years in a certain amount, at the end of which the consumer will have bought all of the shares of guidance and will be in complete and total possession of the home. Okay? In the second stage, what happens is that the consumer takes possession of the home, exclusive possession. Even though he's a minority owner, he has exclusive possession and rights to even prevent, to invite into his home or exclude from his home, to do whatever he wants to do with the property, basically. It's like any other homeowner. And yes, thank you very much. As at the same time that he agrees to make payments to buy shares from guidance, he also agrees, this is the second stage, to pay a little bit of rent for his enjoyment of the entire property, even though he doesn't own the property, right? Now, over time, that rent payment will decrease as the ownership of shares increases, which only makes sense. In other words, even though he enjoys complete and total freedom within the house for a use of the house, he will make rent payments over a period of time, but those will decrease. Wow. Okay. Now, let me get to some of the issues that go along with occupancy. It's probably, even though it's explained on the website and in the material of guidance, not many people realize that there are actually two programs in the Musharaka Mutanaqisa. One program has it that the consumer will pay the insurance. Yes, will pay the insurance on the home. The other one says that guidance will pay it, and that's the way it should be. The default is that the original program is that guidance will pay insurance on the home. However, when given the choice at the time of closing, I think it's 99.9% of home buyers choose to have the program in which they make the payment. Why? From a Sharia perspective, guidance should be making the payment because they're the majority owner. And so our Sharia board said you have to put that option in there. However, from an economic standpoint, when people have insurance already for they have life insurance policies, they have insurance for their cars, whatever the case may be, when they go to the insurance company, they realize that they can get a discount. So they're ultimately going to pay less, because had they left it to guidance to make the payment, right, the rate would have been higher, and they would have had to make it up. So the idea here is to give them the choice. They have the choice, but not many people take it. So this is min bab at-tanazul an al-haq. They have the right to do this. They have a lahum bil khayr, lahum al khayr. With regard to the payment of taxes, again, the thing that would occur to begin with is that they should share. The two should share in the payment of taxes. However, our Sharia board listened to the explanation of the company and decided that no, it should be the other way around. Why? Why? Because the homeowner enjoys exclusive use of the property. The homeowner is the one who chose that particular property and that particular neighborhood. The facilities provided by the civil government, things like roads, trash removal, snow removal in the wintertime, schools, all of that comes from the taxes. None of that is of any benefit to guidance, but all of the benefits from that return directly to the homeowner, right, the consumer. So for that reason, our Sharia board said, okay, we can bypass the standards that we set for AOFI, and we can, in this particular program and under these circumstances, we can request that the consumer, the homeowner, should be made responsible. The question keeps coming up about recourse. The agreement between guidance and the homeowner, again, is a non-recourse agreement. There's once the profits or the money is realized from the sale of the home, under whatever circumstances it may be, all of that is kept by or rather, let me say, if it's less than the value of the home, if it's less than the value of the contract, then its guidance is lost, and guidance will not go after any of the other assets held by the homeowner. Only the home, okay, in a foreclosure situation or whatever. 1 minute. In a case of force majeure or eminent domain, if the government decides to build a house, build a road or a public building on top of the property and takes it, then whatever price they pay, that will go, all of that will go to the, that will be shared, pardon me, that will be shared equally, but according to the shares owned by the two partners. Okay, I have 1 minute, less than 1 minute now, but basically, as I explained earlier, I think the important thing to be aware of with regard to this program and with regard to the other ones is that while the Sharia board was totally aware of the requirements of AOFI, since all of us were members of AOFI, we had to deal with a unique set of circumstances. Had this been, as I said earlier, an ideal Muslim jurisdiction, there wouldn't have been any problem, and we wouldn't have had to do things the way that we did. However, that not being the case, then things got a little bit more complicated. So thank you very much for your time.
It likes you. You want the mic? I'll put a bit of beer in check. Yeah, be careful. You know how much that is. Bismillah. Give me a test. Bismillah. 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 Speak a little bit louder. Okay. I'll try to raise up. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. My job, inshallah, is to review the two articles that you have in your packet related to guidance residential. One of them is Shaykh Ma'an's paper, which covers Islamic mortgage companies in general. And the other one is by Shaykh Salah Hassawi. Actually, mashallah, Shaykh Talal has already mentioned many of the issues that they have. And so therefore, I'm going to begin with a slightly different point. And I think it's a very important point. And that is that, sometimes there's also a disconnect between what we think, like what the different ulama think they should be giving to the people as a whole, and maybe what the people, the Muslims, as some of the speakers I mentioned earlier, those who are really interested in Sharia compliant, those Muslims are probably a certain percentage. And the ones who are interested in Sharia compliant are probably truly interested in Sharia compliance. They are not interested in compromises. So as the Shaykh mentioned, and as he alluded to in his lecture, if you look at guidance residential's contracts and what they do, you see that they contradict some of the IOFI standards. And as he said, all of the signees are members of IOFI. So you can tell that there was something going on, obviously, where they said, okay, this is what we're facing here is different. And actually, it's very clear on their website, on the fatwa that they gave in October 2002. The fatwa doesn't say this is a fully Sharia compliant program that we're all very happy with, at least my reading of it. Since you're one of the signees, maybe you can. It says the Sharia Supervisory Board is of the view that given the circumstances prevailing in the United States, this arrangement conforms to the rules and principles of Sharia, and therefore Muslims may avail themselves of this opportunity to acquire homes and property by means of this method. So a reading of that fatwa already shows you, and I'm going to use the word compromise, and I apologize if it's an offensive word, but that already shows you that there is some compromises going on. And the reason I mention this, and I think it's very important, if Amja eventually comes up with some conclusions or whatever the case might be, I think it is important for us to recognize what is the difference between what should be happening and what is really happening. And if any scholars or any board approves something, and they are approving it with compromises, they should make that clear. Okay? Because I've given more than one class on Islamic home finance in the United States. And every time I give a class and we go through the details of the contracts and the models, and and we discuss how come some ulama approved of this, and for example we mentioned this ruling from the guidance website. In every class, and it doesn't matter if someone dealt with guidance, La Riba or Divan or UIF, in every class there are people who bought with them, and they are so sad now they didn't realize that this what was going on. They thought there's a fatwa that this is halal, and their understanding was this is halal. And they have said to me different people have said to me over and over again that if they knew that this is actually how it works, and these are the Sharia principles, they would have never bought the house. Buying the house was not that important to them. If buying the house means compromising, it wasn't that important to them. To the point that I know of at least three who just sold their houses immediately, because they were so dissatisfied after seeing what were the compromises being made. And we are admitting the fact in this banking system, and of course guidance, alhamdulillah, has can take a different approach, but we are admitting that we are trying to put, as they say, the proverbial square peg of Islamic ethics into a circle of riba. It shouldn't work. I hope, inshallah, it never works that way anyway. Unless that square peg of Islamic ethics is so small, it could squeeze into anything, which I hope we don't have it like that either. So I just think that it's important that we are upfront with the people and say, look, here are the issues. But we feel that because of hajj, because of need, whatever, we are approving it. But people need to be given full disclosure, so to speak. And let them, inshallah, decide if they are in a situation of need, because many people who buy houses, it's the old paradox, right? If you can afford to buy a house, then probably you can afford to rent too. And if you can't afford to buy a house, then it's difficult for you to rent as well. So many people who are buying houses, they can actually live otherwise. They don't really need, in many cases, to buy a house. And so when they find out later that there were some issues, and they feel uncomfortable that maybe this big purchase in their life, right? Everyone says that buying a house is the biggest purchase in their life. That's where a lot of your money is going into. So you don't feel good if a lot of your money is going into something which is not halal, that you feel, yeah, and when I say not halal, I don't mean like haram, as they say, but some level of haramness anyway. Haramness is an English Islamic expression. So with that introduction, let me, as I said, actually many of the points that they have made, the Shaykh has already given guidance's view on it and what led them to it. So first of all, in Dr. Ma'an al-Qada, in his analysis, I guess one of the biggest points, and it is maybe the most problematic even from a theoretical point of view, and it hasn't been explained in detail either in the papers either by Shaykh Salah or by Ma'an al-Qada or by the Shaykh just now. What would be the difference between Sharikat al-Aqd and Sharikat al-Mulk? And the difference, or Sharikat al-Mulk, the difference is quite clear actually. In the one case where you are partners in ownership, in general, this is not the result of an act. This is the result, for example, of you inheriting money in cooperation with others, or of you receiving, not in cooperation, but in sharing it with others, or of you receiving a gift and so forth. So the rules for Sharikat al-Aqd have to be different for than this kind of sharika. This kind of sharika, if, for example, if Dr. Talal tells me that on March 1st he's going to give me and Sadaq his house as a gift. I didn't ask for it. I don't plan on moving to Florida, but if he insists, okay, he's going to give me this as a gift. So now me and Sadiq are going to be the owners of this house, and that transaction will take place, let's say, on March 1st. So now, if I tell to Sadiq, look, I'm not interested in moving to Florida. Are you interested in moving to Florida? He says, yes. So I say, okay, why don't you buy me out? So here he can buy me out from the beginning. We have a partnership, but he can buy me out because we did not actually create this partnership for the purpose of making money or you know, actually something kind of that came upon us. Now, if we take that same approach with respect to an aqd, you can see how by misidentifying, or at least according to this, again, the Shaykh and guidance has come to a different conclusion. By misidentifying what is the model, you can come up with very problematic conclusions. So let's say, for example, you and I are going to buy a house. Okay? I have $10,000, you have $90,000. Now, I can't, so the house obviously is $100,000, by the way. Okay, so I can't come to you and say, look, is that Arabic or English? Is that 15 or? Okay. I can't come to you and say, look, can you give me $90,000 and I'll pay you back $120,000 over time. By the way, anyone say, is that okay? Just out of curiosity, what kind of imams we have here? Okay, that's riba, right? You cannot do that. So I cannot go to him, I want to buy this house, it costs $100,000. I cannot ask him, look, give me 90 and I'll give you 120 over time. So what do? I say, look, let's make a partnership. We're going to buy this house. You're going to put up 90, we're going to put up 100. And even as the moment we buy it, or even before we buy it, I'm going to agree to buy your share for 120 over time. What's the difference? What's the difference from just taking that 90,000 from him and giving him 120 over time, or pre-agreeing that as soon as we buy the house, I'm buying it from him, his share for 120? So in Sharakat al-Aqd, you cannot do that kind of arrangement ahead of time. And so that's why identifying, you know, what kind of Sharika this is not a minor issue, because it's going to have lots of ramifications. And so one of the points that Shaykh Salah and Dr. Ma'an critiqued concerning guidance is their conclusion about what kind of Sharika. But unfortunately, that has lots of ramifications for the model as a whole. So this is the starting point. You know, like the famous Shia person who heard about someone whose name is Uthman, Ali ibn Ali ibn Ali ibn Ali ibn Ali ibn Ali ibn Uthman, and he said al-asas kharban. So if the starting point is bad, you know, you're going to have you can't really work. You can't really work if the starting point is bad. And so that is, I would say, that's not a minor issue. That is something that really needs to be worked out, and the evidence for both sides needs to be given clearly, inshallah, until they can come to an understanding with each other. And since you're now a partnership, theoretically, and for example, guidance owns 90% and you only own 10%, both Dr. Ma'an and Shaykh Salah, of course, have a problem with, you know, guidance owns 90%, and all of the obligations for the house are on the one who's buying it. Okay? And why? Because they say, look, you're living there, you're benefiting from it, and eventually you're going to own the house. I don't know if you mentioned that argument, but sometimes people, okay, sometimes, and it might be another organization, I apologize, but sometimes that's used as an argument. You're going to eventually own it anyway, so therefore all of these things should be on you. Okay? And this goes against the two sheikhs mentioned. Of course, this goes against what has been agreed upon for years. If you own 90% of something, of the house, then you should be taking the burden of 90% of the taxes, 90% of insurance, 90% of whatever. Because you are, the person is renting from you as well, by the way. This is a diminishing partnership, and the person is renting from you. So he has his obligations, taking care of maintenance to some level, but the rest has to fall on you with respect to the percentage that you own. Okay? And that's another major issue. And also they point out that sometimes, I don't remember the details of it, but I think also in Dr. Mann's article, sometimes also the guidance then makes an exception to that. Right? So sometimes guidance acts like the owner is, the one who's living in the house has to take all the burden. But then when there's insurance or there's a calamity or something, then all of a sudden now guidance comes back in and says they own 90% or 70% of whatever the case might be. So there is some obvious inconsistency there that the Shaykh had mentioned. And so these are the basic issues, the basic points. So this is kind of, and the last thing also about home insurance, one of the arguments that guidance makes is that you have different types of home insurance. You have property hazard coverage, you have personal possessions coverage, you have personal liability coverage. And their argument is that, to divide that up would be very difficult because usually it's under one policy and so forth. Personally, I think that they could put, both sides could put money into a fund, into like an escrow, and then at the end of the year, after the end of 6 months, divide things. If they are, I think if they are really treating the person as a partner, as a minority partner, I believe that there should be at least some attempt to remove this critique. And actually, Shaykh Salah's article, it is Shaykh Salah, his originally Shaykh al-Dr. Ali Salus, Salah al-Sawi, Hussein Shawat, and Yusuf Shubaili were asked to comment on some of guidance's policies, and they gave a response critiquing pretty much some of the things that we just mentioned here. And then guidance, so in the article, then guidance responds, and much of the response is like what Shaykh Talal has told us today. And then after a brief introduction, then Shaykh Salah responds again pretty much the same, even after what they've said. It is pretty much the same critique because they haven't really removed many of these problems. There's also an issue, of course, that probably needs much further discussion as well, and that is the relationship with Guidance Residential, which is now a Muslim company, and Freddie Mac. Because if you're selling credit for credit, if you're selling debt for debt, or if you're selling debt in general, this is a problematic issue. In the case of some of the other banks like Dewan Bank, I just heard that the Sharia board said, since you're a non-Muslim company, you can go ahead and do it. We're dealing with a Muslim company.
But it's not debt.
Pardon me?
It's not debt. No. Contract. It's not a contract. It's not debt.
Okay, but
asset which
yeah. So actually, one thing I would like you said in a conversation before, or I guess in a lecture you said earlier. So one thing I would like to see is the contract between Freddie Mac and Guidance. I think that would be very, because Freddie Mac, as we know, they essentially buy mortgages. They don't buy shares in houses, so that would be very illuminating if we can get a copy of that, inshallah. So inshallah, on that point, I will stop and open the floor, inshallah. Or, I'm sorry, turn it back over to the...
Why don't you just hold on to that?
Okay.
If you want to, you just can stay standing, or
Okay.
you can stay seated and answer. It's up to, because whatever's going to work,
All right,
because
so
they're
I'll go
probably
for
going to
it.
address it to both. 25 minutes, we're going to have Q&A specifically for this topic, for what the two sheikhs presented once again. And so we're going to have question and answer, inshallah. So please go ahead and line up at the mics And please, again, let's try to keep the formalities out. Let's try to be as specific and as brief as possible in the question or comment. And we'll also ask that the sheikhs can also be as concise as possible in their responses, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is about the tax point. And in a diminishing Musharaka situation, isn't it also combined in a sense with ijara because you're renting the property? So if it was a pure ijara contract, right, I mean, isn't it still you're making the point that the taxes are benefiting the person who's renting rather than the person who's owning. But actually those taxes benefit the value of the property. So they affected the value of the property when you buy the house and also when you sell the house, and the value of the property throughout that entire partnership, right?
Here's
So
the thing, here's the thing on that, though. The consumer.
That one, the other one.
Oh, this is- The important thing here is that, oh, thank you. Okay. Is that the consumer is the one who goes out and finds the house. The consumer is the one who decides on location, right? Real estate is location, location, location. He's the one who decides what neighborhood, what kind of schools, what kind of future. He's the one who makes the call as to what kind of future he expects for that property, right? So he thinks not only like a homeowner, but also like an investor, right? The homeowner is also the one who benefits from the increase in the price. And everyone, when they buy a house, they're going to buy a house that they think will increase in value rather than one that's going in a crummy neighborhood where things are just going to get worse, right? So in view of all of those facilities for the consumer, we made that exception.
So it's because the person who's renting, the consumer, they're the ones who are benefiting from the appreciation.
Precisely.
Therefore, they're the ones who should pay for the taxes.
Yep. Not only the appreciation, but also all of the other things, the facilities and so on and so forth.
Would you take the same view in a pure 100% ijara contract, or would that be different?
You know, it would depend. You know, is it commercial? Is it residential? And what are the circumstances? You know, that you have to make the call based on the case.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah. Shaykh Jamaal, my question is to you. Based on thus far what the discussions have been from all of the scholars and a couple of points that you made, how should I put it in the best way? In a conference like this, where majority of attendees are imams, community leaders, would it be advisable to advise the community, the Muslim masses, to focus more towards renting than owning? I say this because I'm young. Perhaps I don't understand the need, or I cannot comprehend the need to own a house, especially if there's such murky waters to tread to before getting to that which is halal.
I'd like to answer that, sorry. Okay. There are a couple of points that need to be made here. Number one, home ownership has all kinds of benefits for the community. You put down roots in a community, you enfranchise people, you become a factor in the life of the community. All of that is important for the building of our minority Muslim community here. That's one consideration. The second thing, though, and I alluded to this earlier this morning when I spoke. The second thing is that, okay, let's say that you decide that Diyanatan, you are not going to buy a home by means of financing provided by any of the companies financing here, right? You just make that decision that your deen won't allow you to do it. Your inner conscience, you're not comfortable with it. And instead, what are you going to do? You're going to rent. Okay. What kind of rental contracts, what kind of leases do you think are available in the market? The majority of those leases do not conform with Sharia standards. So, one way or the other, you're caught in between a rock and a hard place, if that's your case. So it's kind of our feeling that, you know, it's a far better deal for you
economically and from a religious perspective and from a community building perspective, from a tax perspective. This is a big thing, tax as well, that you actually buy a home.
So the question was directed towards me, so I guess I should at least comment on it. Inshallah. So, the question, obviously, for most Americans, not Muslim Americans, most Americans would like to buy a house, and many of them buy houses, although I have two older siblings who are non-Muslim. They've never bought a house, and they're not interested in buying a house. But most Americans, it's part of the American dream since the 50s and so forth. Because there are some benefits. No one is going to deny that there are some benefits. Okay? There's also a lot of headaches and other things that are involved when owning a house as opposed to renting. But in general, there are, for most people, there are going to be benefits. And maybe for the community as a whole, as for example, as he said, in strengthening or as the Americanization of Muslims, as one author stated it. So, no one is denying that, but the question though is, if we want to strengthen the Muslims and the other point also was tax advantage, which is, again, we're talking about tax advantage, we're talking about money, right? You're going to pay less money if you do it this way as opposed. So the question of compromises for the sake of more money, the question of compromises for the sake of enfranchising us, is that?
Yeah.
Okay, more strongly. And in order to attain that, do things which are clearly questionable, okay, clearly compromises. And not only are they compromises, but sometimes, not necessarily maybe with guidance, but sometimes there are clearly compromises with riba. And we all know the stance of the Sharia with respect to riba. So you're going to be forced to live somewhere. Obviously, lease contracts, if you study them, they're much less questionable than getting engaged in something that might be just a means or really some kind of hidden riba. So, we have to take, we have to weigh all of what are the benefits, but what are we giving up to attain those benefits? And what are we sacrificing from our own personal perspective? So I think with respect to your community, I think just emphasize the fact that it's very important that we obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all aspects of our life, including the financial aspects. And we don't want to get ahead at the cost of risking something with respect to our deen. But otherwise, I would say, the question of should someone get involved in these things, that might be more of an individual basis and see how strong the need is and so forth. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily come out and just say, I would take that more as at an individual level, because maybe some people are really in need and so therefore they have to resort to something.
If it's okay, just because we see there's a great demand, there's only 20 minutes left before the next session, if we can try to be as concise as possible. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you please, I have just a little question that I am concerning. According to the Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 280, إن كان ذو عسرة فنظرة إلى ميسرة. What's the regulation that you have if I was behind in the payment? It's due on the first of the month. Now the 15th, I don't have the money.
Abdurrahman.
What the penalty in that?
That's a commercial question, so I'll have the commercial guys answer it. Abdurrahman.
And just to make it simple for you, this verse, Antham Shubat al-Tafsir, it has three different categories that it has been the tribe of Al-Mughira and Bani Thaqif, or it had been to the general of the general Dain, or to the Dain of the Riba as Al-Qadi Shuraih. But as Fadil Shaykh Al-Izz ibn Salam, he concluded that it's for any debt. It doesn't matter if it's riba or not. Just to make it simple for you, Go ahead.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله My name is Abdurrahman Nashnoush, and I'm the Vice President of the National Sales with Guidance Residential. To answer your question directly, brother, the late fee in the guidance program specifically is $50 or 2% of the due amount, whichever is less. So it's $50 flat fee or 2% of the due amount, whichever is less. And based on the Sharia ruling, the justification for this fee is basically to recollect the cost of collecting the late payment. When you look at that specifically in the guidance program and you compare it to the general practice in the industry, usually they have a certain percentage of the monthly payment collected and with compounded interest until the entire amount is collected and the late balance is zero. So that's to answer your question directly.
الغاية لا تبرر الوسيلة.
لا ما فيش غاية وسيلة. I'm answering the question. You asked what is the late fee, and I'm telling you the late fee is $50 flat.
And scholar like Dr. Salah, so somebody will say this is riba or not. I believe it's riba clearly, So if this is conditional in the contract, the whole contract is riba. I'm sorry, إقراري بالربا هو ربا. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
جزاك الله خير.
Wait a minute. Let me just add.
We're not going to take things out of order because
Yeah.
it's going to become chaos.
Yeah.
Please. Brother Yahya.
To answer the question, this fee is not a penalty fee. It is a service fee, and it's based precisely on the amount of money that it takes to chase after this person who has been negligent or who has intentionally not paid. Sorry, Brother Yahya. Brother Yahya.
Excuse me. There are people who lost their job. There are people who got laid off. And we have the miskin fund, which helps them until they find a job. We do not throw people out the God's way. And we have the proof waiver. And it is your responsibility as an Islamic finance company, in your own right, to help people and not to put them on the street. The second important thing, it should be our duty to put people in homes out of apartments.
Brother Yahya, we agree with you, and it's exactly the same with guidance. Well, what needed correction was the idea that that's riba. It's not at all riba. It's not a penalty. It is a fee which is commensurate exactly with the amount of money that it takes to collect. Licking the stamps, putting them into the mail, hiring people to go after on the telephone, all that sort of thing. That's exactly what it is. It has nothing to do with riba.
مشايخ من فضلك Shaykh, we're not going to accept that. We're not going to accept that from you or from anybody else, please. We don't want chaos and anarchy here. We have rules, we're going to respect rules. You want to talk? Anybody. Makes no difference, doctor, not doctor. You want to talk? Get in line. Let's be concise. Okay? We have 10 minutes left. Please.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dr. Talal, you mentioned that the customer has the right or a choice to choose whether they pay insurance or guidance pays insurance.
Yes.
Is there a difference in the payment or it does regardless of the payment?
Yeah, there is a difference in the payment, and that's why we leave the matter to the consumer.
So there is no choice.
Yeah, it's their choice.
There is no choice. If he is,
No,
if
there
he's
is a
going to
choice.
pay more, if he's going to pay more, if guidance pays, right? Then there is no choice.
Well,
That's why you
then
mentioned that
there you go.
99%.
There you go. It's going to depend on the individual. If they want, they have the option. No one takes it, almost no one. A handful of people.
Okay, because there is no choice. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I have two questions and one comment. Actually, one question for each of the speakers. First, on home ownership, I think a lot of the imams should know that the stats for owning homes in America show that when people own homes, they go more to their institution, churches, religious institutions. They give back more, and this is the one thing that helps distinguish between people that stay poor and don't grow in America and people that actually flourish. So I think it's important to know why we're here, because it's important for Muslims to flourish. What happened in the UK is for a long time, they did not own homes. And so we know the situation there is much different than the situation here. My question for Sheikh Yusuf, I'm going to just ask the first question, then I'll ask the second one. Sheikh Yusuf, Sheikh Jamaal mentioned that he felt like this fatwa was slightly compromising. I just wanted to get your view on that, whether you felt like it was compromising, because earlier you said you guys did not pass a red line. And the question for Sheikh Zarabozo is, you said that the partner has to share taxes. I own a rental property. I make sure that whatever I rent out my property for, my taxes, association, and my mortgage payment is covered, and inshallah there's also a profit. So in this partnership, instead of charging the taxes, if they just raise the amount they charge for rent, would that then make it compliant according to it? And if there's more of a benefit for the Muslim client to pay the taxes than to pay the higher rate, then what would the ulama opinion be?
I'll answer the first one, the first part, and then I'll give it to you, Jamaal, Dr. Jamaal. Yeah, I wouldn't use the word compromise. We did deviate a little bit. Maybe that's just as bad in terms of its connotation. But what I regret, and I'll be very frank with you, what I regret and what is really needed in the industry is more transparency. In other words, we should have documented all of our meetings and all of the reasons for all of our decisions. You know, it's become the standard, and even AOFI, insists on this, that at the end of the exercise there should be a fatwa. Well, fine, we did that, but it's really not enough. We need much more than that, because I assure you, for every one of these deviations, right, there are very, very good reasons. But you know, it was 10, 12 years ago. I do not remember all of them. Dr. Sawi asked me a question at lunchtime. Likewise, I don't want to guess. I want to be precise when I give answers. So, but as far as compromise, no. Secondly, when we talk about, we use I think Dr. Hatim talked about the red line, and I use the analogy of the traffic light. You've got a green light, which is clearly halal. You've got a red light, which is clearly haram. And in between, you have the yellow. Now, for most people, the yellow light means that you can still drive through, right? All right. So, you know, our deviations never went into the red. That we wouldn't consider that a deviation, not a valid deviation at all. If you get into the red, there's no question. Al-haram mubayyin. It's clear. Clearly, you cannot go there. So we didn't go there. What we did was found ways to just, if we had to, get in between.
Barakallahu. Of course, the problem is that yellow deviations over time turn red, right? But then if you wait long enough, they'll be green again. So, with respect to, unfortunately, I don't remember all of the details of your question. But with respect to the question was the sharing
taxes.
And by the way, according to back to your first question, I mean your first point, I didn't deny, by the way, the benefits of home ownership. And home ownership, if you go to some other countries, home ownership is percentage-wise. Those countries never had anything like Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae. And so percentage-wise, home ownership is very small, actually. And sometimes you never even really they still own the land underneath you. And many of those people are very happy. The Danish people, for example, are always considered the happiest people in the world. And their percentage of home ownership is relatively small. Of course, they're the happiest people in the world because they have the least expectations, is how it turned out. Again, the question of sharing,
it was sharing taxes versus increasing the rate of rent to cover the taxes.
Okay, so
which is what I do as a landlord.
Okay, so again, when you're when you're a landlord and you're charging a person a certain rent, he has that, let's say like $1,000 a month for the whole year, right? He signs a lease for the whole year. Right?
Yeah.
If your taxes go up in June of that year, you're not going to increase his rent, right?
You usually know 1 year in advance, so you would at the end of the renewal period.
Okay,
usually,
but
so.
if you have some expenses in the middle that go up, you're the owner. You're supposed to be taking the burdens of ownership.
Yep.
And when you are a partner, the burdens of ownership, at least in theory, it's supposed to be shared properly between the two, and that is the best solution. Now, if it's hard to work out, and maybe some other, if it turns out to be like really impossible to work out, so therefore we need to make some compromise. I'm not saying that this is that's going to bring the end to the deal or anything like that, but that is the goal that we should be starting for.
So
And the point that the two sheikhs were making, because remember, I'm presenting other people's papers, not my paper. They're presenting the fact that all of the burden is on that minority owner. And if you look at it and he's just seeing over and over again that all of it is on him, it does seem to contradict the principle of partnership that we.
Jazakallah khair.
5 minutes are left.
It will take 20 seconds. If you look back in any textbook that, if you look back any textbook that talks about what we're dealing with, it ends with the death, inheritance. Biyur starts, any chapter starts with biyur, but ends with, you have not answered that question. Let's say my father signed when I was, let's say, 12. And my father died, I forgot, but it's not my father, but I'm older right now. He dies when I'm already old, and he left a couple kids. How do you deal with the inheritance of the kids? What share do they take to inherit? And that question has not been answered so far all day long. How do we deal with that kind of situation? Do we sign another new contract? Who do we foreclose it? How do we terminate this kind of?
What happens in the case of death?
The question I have is if let's say we had
Abdurrahman, commercial.
Not a commercial.
Inshallah. The inheritance basically inherit the share which the deceased owned in the Sharaka, and based on certain legal procedures, that ownership gets transferred to the inheritance. You follow the law of the land, which is the American way, obviously, yes. Yes, there is will. This is more of a legal issue, and there is a lot of complications behind this question. But the simple answer to that is, you basically follow the law of the land, and the inheritance, they inherit the share of the deceased, basically. Can I was actually in line for a question. Can I ask a question too, or? I was next in line. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. Actually, my question has two parts too.
If it's okay, we can try to keep just one question.
Okay, I will combine them into inshallah. Well, an imam facing his community members, the community members do not care much about the technicality of the words and the terminology and what was going on in the internal discussions. They want solutions. So we're looking for solutions. Even though we have discussed this topic religiously and economically, but personally, I believe that the shortest cut or the shortest way to solve all these problems is more political. Policymakers, lawmakers, authorities should save us all this headache and come forward, try to help. Now what we need to do to reach them in order to convince them, that's the work. We should work in this line. Now my question is, yes, now supposedly I have two community members. One of them come to me and tell me, well, I am fine, I'm paying the rent, I'm good, I don't have any problem. Should I buy a house? What I do, I advise him what I advise myself. I strongly discourage them to go through guidance or riba, and more even through the conventional bank. Because, well, I tell them, stay in the safe side, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. And I remind them, فَأَذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Because I feel that the discussion is being a little bit biased toward promoting that if there is no need if there is no need? This is the first question. So should we discourage or encourage? What I do, I discourage very strongly. Now the second question, second community member come to me, tell me, well, I need a house. I legitimately need a house. Now, I know it's very difficult to answer this question maybe, but do you have an order? Let's say, well, you start with this and guidance or this or Lariba or UIF. So this is the second question. And a suggestion, inshallah, very quick. I would love to see, inshallah, in the future conferences, more case studies. At university, they teach us many concepts through case studies. that it's easy for us to understand, inshallah, and to, and barakallah fiqh. Jazakumullah khair.
Do you have any answers?
The answer.
I don't even know the question.
I didn't really hear any question mark at the end.
No.
Go ahead then.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم مرة أخرى. I'm going to try to mix between English and Arabic because alhamdulillah I can speak both يعني fairly okay. So I do have a couple of questions for Sheikh Jamaal, and I have a, can I make a quick comment? Being a person who is practicing and promoting Islamic home finance in the US, I'm honestly honored, alhamdulillah, to be here in this convention to look at the different options available for the Muslim community to facilitate Islamic home financing in the US. And although I do represent Guidance Residential, which is one of the competitors in the US, but I'm actually here with a much bigger vision, which is to advance this necessary industry, which is the Islamic financial industry, to complete our needs as a community in the US and to strengthen our community to become a functional part of the society at large and to have more effect with decisions that impact us directly or indirectly. Now, this is just, really my feelings, and in my opinion, very humble opinion, and I know that I realize that I'm speaking to such, scholars and people of knowledge, which I am not anywhere among that. But in my very humble opinion, I believe if we are to evaluate any of the programs or products, you cannot simply separate three different things that must be evaluated, on a parallel basis. And those three things are the actual contract, which I believe, you possess copy of perhaps most of the financiers in the US, but also very important to evaluate the actual process and the essence of the transaction. And I think these three pieces, in a way or another, complete what a good program is. But again, it's just a suggestion, that I would like to put on the table for you to perhaps consider, inshallah, in the future. Now, my direct question to Dr. Jamaal is, and I'm genuinely asking these questions to learn and to perhaps to open the discussion for a more useful questions and argument. You had mentioned that what is the difference between lending $100,000 and getting back $120,000, where in your Musharaka product or Musharaka program or the Sharakatul Milk, you claim that you give the 100,000 and you get it back at 120,000. And I believe the difference here is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned already in Surah Al-Baqarah. قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. So the difference between the two, wallahu a'lam, and the question is really for you, is the difference between dealing on lending money and returning the loan in the form of investment and actually investing in an asset. And by the way, the relationship severs with the asset being removed from the entire transaction. The second very quick point is you have based your Jazakallah khair.
Anyway,
it's just very important because I'm trying to establish basis for Sharakatul Milk.
Okay, so just quickly on this point, that it's a different issue here, and this is the issue of getting ribh without any risk, which is not allowed in the Sharia. So if you allow this kind of agreement even before we buy anything, you are getting ribh without any risk, and that's not acceptable. So it's a clear point in the Sharia.
Ikhwa, inshallah azza wa jal, anything else of questions that you have, we're going to have to wait until after this last session is over. Then there will be an entire hour that'll be available to you. But listen, that hour can go by fast. If we want to give dissertations, and in the response we're going to give thesis, it's not going to last us to have except 2 or 3 people to have their concerns addressed and things of that sort. So the time is how you want to use it. Inshallah, now we're going to move on to the next session, and it is the final one. And I really don't like being in this position, so please don't take it against me, but I'm trying to keep you on time so that we could all walk away and hopefully benefit with something, and that we can try to minimize anything of chaos and people speaking out of order and disrupting what we're trying to get done here. So for this last session, you've been waiting forever? Maybe Sadiq can give you a number, inshallah. I don't know how else they can better organize it. I'm sorry. So for this last session, inshallah, we're going to have the ijara contract as regards Divan Bank, and so we're going to once again invite our guests from Divan Bank to come on up here along with Shaykh Jamaal. And for this last session, inshallah, we're going to once again have a 20-minute time limit for each of the 2 presenters. And then after that, bidnillah, we're going to go straight into Q&A. So please do remain seated, inshallah. We'll have him go first, if that's okay.